It's the ERP Confab. I'm David Essex, industry editor of TechTarget's SAP website, with my colleague, news writer Jim O'Donnell. ASUG, America's SAP User Group, is the world's largest group of SAP customers. ASUG has more than 130,000 members across North America and plays an active role as the voice of the customer with SAP. In the podcast, ASUG CEO Jeff Scott discusses SAP customer priorities, SAP's progress in enticing customers to move their legacy ERP to S/4HANA in the cloud, and the impact of generative AI. We talked shortly before the annual Sapphire Conference in Orlando, which ASUG co-sponsors with SAP, and discussed our expectations for the show.
Jeff, thanks for joining us this afternoon. I know you're pretty busy leading up to Sapphire next week, so I'm sure it's a busy time for you. We wanted to kind of, get an idea of what's going on with the SAP customers these days and sort of where they are in a couple of really pretty significant areas. And maybe you can just sum up sort of, we'll start at a kind of a higher level and maybe we'll get into some details. But what would you say are SAP customers' top priorities for the next few years as certain things like the maintenance deadline come into, closer to play?
Well, Jim and David, thank you first and foremost for having me in this afternoon. It's only a few days before Sapphire and ASUG annual conference. So we're down to the wire as it comes to thinking about what we want to say to customers, and the partner announcements are starting to roll out. AWS made some pretty significant announcements yesterday. We're getting ready to have, the largest event in the SAP ecosystem in just a few days. And so what is on the minds of the SAP customers as we head into Orlando? I think it's four things. First and foremost, moving to S/4HANA in some way, shape, or form, right? And in our customer research, 48% of our customer base, ASUG customers, say that S/4HANA migration is top of their list. Second, and this is one that's been here for a long, long time, I think it'll be here for forever, is integration between SAP and non-SAP systems. We know that the common SAP customer landscape is more diverse than ever. There's more solutions being deployed. So 36% want to understand how to do the best and most efficient and longest lasting integration that they possibly can. Number three, automation. 34% are thinking about automation. Standardization of business processes, 33%. So that whole idea of I need to be more automated with what I do is incredibly important. I think artificial intelligence plays into that. I think obviously we'll get into that in a few minutes. And then finally, analytics, dashboards, cloud, AI, ML are all the areas where I think we will see the most energized conversations in the days leading up to Sapphire and ASUG annual conference and during the event next Tuesday, Wednesday, and Monday with pre-cons. So, that's typically, and those things have been consistent over the past number of years. The percentages might change a little bit, but every year that we do customer research, and we are in our 6th or 7th year pulse of the SAP customer, those things have not moved.
Now, obviously you said that, moving to the cloud is a top priority. And a couple of years ago, SAP did come out with the Rise with SAP program, which ostensibly was trying to make it easier for customers, having a simplified package for them to move to their hyperscaler of choice. And they've evolved, the functionality and sort of the strategy, a lot of behind that program in a couple of years. But still, most of the customer base does remain on premises. I don't know what ASUG, maybe you can tell us what ASUG research says, but some of the other user groups that are European-based, have said that their research says that large majority of their customers aren't in favor of using RISE. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that and say maybe what may be the motivation for companies to sort of either be for or not for, moving to the cloud through the Rise with SAP program.
So, Jim, if you're okay with this, I'd like to kind of maybe come at this from a slightly different perspective and try this through a different avenue than what we typically try to talk about it. And the way that I think about this is the following. I think we do live in starkly different times. And a lot of this came about, obviously, during the pandemic when a big part of the world learned how to live digitally, right? We all worked from our homes. We all learned how to use tools like Teams and Google Meet and Zoom, and we learned how to order at epic scale things to be delivered to our homes, right? So we learned as consumers how to work very differently than what we'd worked before. And so this idea of digitization, this idea that we can live in a digital world, has really gone to a much different level. And even today, I remark whenever I'm out and about. I saw some pictures this morning in the news. I watch people when I'm out on the street. What are they most likely doing? They've got their faces buried in their digital devices, whether that be an iPhone or an Android, right? People are now walking down the streets more interested in what's happening on that screen than what's happening around them. So we live in this world where information is conveyed to us digitally, right? It's a starkly different world, which means that if you believe that your ERP is the nerve center of your enterprise, it is the one single source of truth that says where things happen, that single source of truth has to look and act differently than it did 15, 20 years ago, right? And so when I think about this, I think about a couple things. If an organization says, I want to be on the innovation curve. So I don't necessarily need to be on the far right of it. So I don't want to be leading the innovation curve, but I want to be somewhere between the middle to the right side of it, right? If that's where I want to be, and I want to be able to take advantage of innovation at my pace, at my speed, and figure out how to do it, it necessitates that you do three things. The first is you need to be operating in a cloud environment, and you need to be comfortable with cloud first principles, right? Because that's the way that you get to speed. Number two, you need to be thinking about your ERP as a cloud ERP, meaning it is thinking about that as a software as a service facility. So I am trying to do things to move the responsibility for general ERP code management out and back to my ERP vendor, in this case, SAP. Number three, I have to be very careful about what I customize and how I think about the things that are really unique to my business, that are the secret sauce. I want to customize as little as possible so my maintenance and ongoing upgradability are as little as possible. So low customization, software as a service, cloud-based. If I think about those three things, because I want to be on the middle to the right side of the innovation curve, that necessitates that I have to think about the modern ERP, the cloud ERP being SAP S4HANA, and my entryway into that is RISE on SAP. That's how I think about that. And so I think if you think about your need as a business to be on an innovation curve, that's where you need to be. Now, some of my peers in other user communities believe that what SAP should do is backport all of that feature-rich functionality, that modern stuff back into on-premise ERP software, back into ECC. I don't share that same view because I think that's virtually impossible to do because we live in a starkly different world. So if we believe that generative AI is where this new battleground is going to play out, where we're going to have massive amounts of efficiency and different ways to integrate with customers, and I want to be on the forefront of that, then I need to be on those platforms because that's where the innovation is going to be happening first. It might at some point get down to my on-premise ECC environment, but I think that's going to be a long way away. And obviously we have things like 2027 coming closer and closer. So I don't know how you do generative AI, how you do modern cloud architecture in an on-premise environment. So that's why I think it's about cloud, and that's why I think it's about RISE adoption.
Well, let's just say, take it as a matter of faith that, most of the customers that are sort of on premises right now do want to move to the cloud. They kind of want to do it in their own way. Maybe they don't want to go through RISE. Maybe they already have, for example, they already have their existing agreements with their hyperscalers, and they have maybe a hybrid environment, which RISE might not support.
Yeah.
Do you see SAP as pushing them sort of into RISE, or will they support customers that kind of want to do it their own way?
One of the great things about the SAP ecosystem is the diversity of customer in it. There is no cookie cutter. Everyone does this the same way. So every customer I talk to has a different viewpoint on how they're going to make this journey. So the short answer to your question, Jim, is yes. I believe that there is a lot of detail to be worked out as every customer works through this. Are they going to be able to do a future ERP on-prem for the rest of eternity? Probably not. Are there intermediate steps that they can take in order to adopt this? I mean, we still have many customers who are working through the early stages or their latter stages of their ECC deployments. Many who say, you know what, look, my project portfolio, my list of projects that I need to complete is very, very long. And I want to do S4, but it wasn't at the top of my list. I think there's some great examples where some of that needs to be worked through. And every customer has a different way of approaching it. But if we start with this notion that it's all about cloud-first principles, I think the rest of it starts to fall into place.
Jeff, you've already alluded to this issue, but I still want to ask a question about the whole multi-tenant SaaS issue. So Rise with SAP and Grow with SAP both have multi-tenant S4HANA Cloud Public Edition, which is the current name, as the ultimate destination that SAP really seems to be encouraging, even though Rise in particular seems to allow halfway measures like the private cloud edition. But moving to multi-tenant S4HANA Cloud is a big change. It enforces certain best practices, which I think you mentioned earlier, and is a more simplified ERP system than even the on-premises S4HANA and certainly the older on-premises Business Suite. What are ASUG members saying about being presented with that kind of choice? Do you hear any resistance to it from them?
David, what a fantastic question, right? And you know, this notion of single tenant, multi-tenant, it's very, very interesting. And even the notion of public cloud versus private cloud, right? And I think that what happens is you start to come at this from, you know, where have I been versus where would I like to go? Right. And I think a lot of us, these cloud first principles, even for myself, and it's great you brought this up because I spent 6 hours yesterday in a conference room with SAP and some of the global SIs talking about exactly what you're describing and kind of working through this. And if you really believe in software as a service, and allow me to just go a little weird here for you, I shouldn't care whether I'm multi-tenant or single tenant. I am buying a service and I'm buying a capability. Now, we also know that many of our customers, many of the SAP run their enterprise systems on this. This is high stakes stuff. So if I want to make sure that I'm highly protected, highly secure, I'm probably going to prefer a single tenant solution, right? And for many customers who are very, very large and operating a big landscape, single tenant might be the right answer for them. Others might decide that multi-tenant is a better solution. How I think about it is let's start with business requirements and what you want to achieve and the cycle times you need and the response times you need and hold our vendors accountable for that outcome, right? If we start to get in the middle of describing how to get it done, then this kind of starts to get a little bit more complicated. So my version is I would ultimately like to see if we really think that SaaS is the destination and the real purpose of the modern IT enterprise is to be a business partner and figure out how to innovate and get business value out of technology investments as quickly as possible, which means I don't want to be stuck in customization loops. I don't want to be stuck in keeping the lights on type of business models. Then I should be thinking about public cloud. I also recognize that SAP's delivery capability may not be there for every industry that needs a public cloud solution. So unfortunately, we have two things in motion simultaneously: SAP's capability from a functionality perspective and where the companies and the organizations need to be. When we sit down in conference rooms and we have conversations with multiple customers simultaneously and we come at this from that level, we tend to get to a better outcome. Left to its own devices, I always hear single tenant, private cloud, on-premise, but I think the world has moved and we need to have as a customer base more of those conversations. Ideal state for me, single multi-tenant, I'm ambivalent as to which, cloud-based, SaaS-based. We as a customer base, if we really want to get to time to value and get to faster time to value, we have got to move responsibility for basic levels of code back to SAP. Or the partners, if the partners are now being asked to write the code on behalf of SAP. And that's a whole nother topic for another podcast. By the way, and this also causes my head to spin because I've been a CIO, I've been involved in technology for 30 years. The paradigm is completely different. It's completely different. So you're asking folks who have been around the SAP ecosystem for the better part of their entire career to whole-scale change the way we as customers have worked with SAP over the last 30 years. And it requires a large degree of trust, right? Which I understand why that may not be there yet, but it's a very different paradigm operating environment.
You talked a lot about sort of the the way you have to change the systems and the complication of that.
Yeah.
And part of what SAP has been talking about for a while is this getting to the notion of the clean core. And do you think that the speaking to ASUG members, I hear at least some evidence that a lot of people maybe don't understand that, don't really understand what it gets to get to that. They kind of throw out these terms like you've got to get to the clean core. Do you think, based on what you're talking to ASUG members, is that a message that resonates, and do people really understand what getting to that clean core means?
Candidly, I don't think we're clear on what the definition of clean core is, including me and including ASUG, and we put a lot of pressure on SAP to do a better job of defining what clean core is, and once it's defined, sticking to that definition for a long period of time. So what I'm interested in doing is spending time with SAP and say, let's talk about clean core 2 to 3 years down the road, and then back up into it, versus making it feel like we're changing the definition every time we sit down, right? So I think one of the, again, I had this conversation with SAP yesterday, maybe we need to lever back to what are some clean core principles, and do we as a customer base and do we as SAP agree, and the partners, on what these clean core principles are, and can we rally around them, right? This notion of I want to keep my core clean so I can upgrade it faster, right? Which means I'm going to move over time more interfaces, changes into my BTP layer, with the promise that I can then adopt changes that SAP is going to release on a faster cycle. I think there's still a lot to understand there, and understand how does that really play out. And I even had conversations this morning with someone in the partner ecosystem about the notion of clean core. I'm still learning as the CEO of ASUG and the Chief Community Officer about clean core. I don't even think I completely understand it. And if I don't understand it, I'm sure there's lots of fellow, SAP and ASUG members who don't completely understand it either.
If we can stick with that for a minute, I have to say, since I'm typical journalistic cynic, when I first heard the term, I thought, oh, here we go.
Here we go.
Another term.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Where'd this come from?
Yeah.
Right?
And then, as often happens with my cynicism, once I learned more about it, I could at least see the sense in it. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but it looks like it was another way, because SAP could see that customers were having trouble conceptualizing, especially the cloud move and what we've been talking about with SaaS and going to a different ERP system, even an SAP one, that this was a way of helping them to sort of chunk certain pieces that they could get their mind around, and also sort of separate out maybe even like the hybrid versus on-premises thing, so that they can kind of make it seem more logical and doable with that new concept of clean core. Do you think that's what they're doing there?
I think it is, and I think that one of the essences of clean core, to your point, David, is it's not a one-stop thing. You don't do it. You don't just sweep in and say, congratulations, I'm now clean core. I think it is, I apologize, I think this is another overused word, a journey, right? That I don't believe that most organizations can say tomorrow, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and I will therefore be clean core. I think there are some very good reasons, especially for the longer you have been an SAP customer. You may have legacy integrations. You may have other things that necessitate you have to make changes in the core. You can't move that to BTP tomorrow. And so I think the notion, I can get my head wrapped around this a little bit easier if I say these are principles, and over time I need to adopt these principles to move forward. I think the principles make sense. Right? I think the principles make sense, but I don't think this is a black or white scenario. And that, I think, just makes this just a little bit more complicated. Mm-hmm. And I don't believe we've done an adequate job of educating the customer base on what this really all means. And what does it entail, and what does it look like, right? It was interesting today. I learned that what I learned today is one of the definitions of clean core is you move off of SAP GUI and you move into Fiori. I was like, huh? I didn't realize that was a and sometimes I'm late to the party. So this may be like, everyone's like, of course, Jeff, that's the way it works. I'm like, well, light bulb went off in my head today. I finally woke up, but I'm like, wait a minute. Fiori is considered clean core and traditional SAP GUI isn't. I'm still trying to process that, right? So I've asked SAP on behalf of the North America customer base, can you please put a clean core definition in front of us that we understand and you're going to stick to for a period of time? Because if it's changing every time we get together, it's not creating clarity, it's creating massive amounts of confusion. And that then breeds frustration. That then causes the customer base to slow down and say, whoa, wait a minute, I don't understand this, so why don't we just take a pause until I do? That's not good. So we need to do a much better job of describing this in clear terms that the customer base understands.
Well, this is another one of those terms that they've kind of come up with maybe out of thin air, but hopefully we can maybe understand it a little bit more. And with the rise of last year, we've seen like this tremendous explosion of sort of AI-based technology coming in and capabilities. And SAP is using this term, I think they're defining it as business AI. It's business-ready AI.
Yeah.
And that's another one I'm not sure anyone really, understands what it is and what the value of it is. Are you seeing that same thing from your conversations with ASUG members too, that they have more understanding of what SAP means when they're talking about business AI?
Yeah, and I think what complicates this, Jim, is everybody is talking about AI. So SAP is talking about it. The hyperscalers are talking about it. Everyone is walking out. I mean, AWS made an announcement just recently about their partnership with SAP on AI capabilities. Google talks about Gemini. Microsoft talks about Copilot. So I think one of the complexities in the enterprise today, if you're an enterprise architect, is how do you sort all this out? And I happened to spend some time with Microsoft a few weeks ago on their version of AI, which is different than how SAP describes Joule. Are they complementary? Are they competitive? Where do they overlap? So I think for a customer today, there is no one answer to this. At the same time, we are at the very early stages of what AI can do, should do, might do, could do, right? So this whole thing is moving at an incredible speed. Everything we talk about is iterating and getting better at an amazing rate. So if we don't get off the sidelines, we are very likely to be left behind. But exactly where do you walk onto the playing field? And when you walk on, do you understand the rules of the game? What are you doing? And so for the average enterprise customer today, I think this is a bewildering place to be. So back to ASUG research. 5% of the user base says they use AI daily to some way, shape, or form. 34% say they've used it once. 26%, as of earlier, you said they've never used it. I still believe that there is a lot of work to do here to understand how are we actually going to use these AI capabilities? How do they scale? Right? So are these one-off things I can use? I sit down and I open up a Joule window and I type in a prompt and it's never going to be reused again? Or do I actually start to introduce these into, enterprise speed workflows that are being used by thousands of people globally? I don't have the answer to that. I'm very curious to see where Christian and Thomas and Jürgen and the SAP leadership team and Philip Herzig, who leads AI for SAP, where do they think they're going to take this in front of a customer base next week in Orlando? I'm still, so to your point, I'm still very much watching this intently, and there's a lot going on. And obviously there's some truth here. NVIDIA will be with Christian in the keynote on Tuesday. Look at NVIDIA's stock price multiple. Look at what has happened to that organization over such a short period of time. What's going on? And I don't think I'm alone in trying to figure this out. We are all trying to figure this out. And where's it going? I don't know. I've seen great examples of Copilot doing some very interesting things. I've seen examples of Joule doing some amazing things. If you're an enterprise architect, how do you sort all that out? Can you make an enterprise consistent solution to this? And I think the answer is you can't right now.
Jeff, someone looking at the user groups of the biggest ERP vendors, including Oracle, might wonder about their independence, especially when they co-sponsor big conferences like ASUG has actually done with
With
SAP for
us.
years. I've always wondered, how does ASUG's leadership team strike the balance between the vendor and its customers so the customer's interests remain paramount and their concerns are really addressed? It seems like you could be more useful to SAP also if you can be an honest broker and sometimes tell them unpleasant things they might not want to hear. At the same time, I would think you need ASUG members to really trust that you are independent from SAP. So I'm curious how you manage that relationship.
So how I think about this, and this is my 10th year leading ASUG as the Chief Community Champion. Here's how I think about it. My job is to make sure that this ecosystem, and when I use the word ecosystem, I'm talking about the customers who buy SAP solutions, the partners who help turn dreams into reality, and maybe also provide additional software components that SAP doesn't, and SAP itself. Those three entities. But behind each of those entities is hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who have invested their careers in being part of this SAP ecosystem. Jim, you've done it. David, you've done it. You report on this ecosystem. I certainly do it. All of us have a stake in this. So I am not independent when it comes to the importance of this ecosystem being strong, not for these past 50 years, as we celebrated SAP's 50th anniversary, but for the next 50 years, right? My job is to make sure that customers get value out of their SAP investments, not show them the exits to get out of it. All of the customers, if you're an ASUG member, you are probably very much connected to and want to be successful with your SAP investments. These are high stakes investments that you're making. The ecosystem we've talked about today, we talked about AI, we've talked about clean core, we've talked about cloud, we've talked about SaaS. I mean, we've wandered through what I believe are some very complex things. And I don't believe that our ecosystem has gotten simpler over the last 15 years. I believe it's gotten far more complex. I believe there's more nuances and there's more noise than there ever has been. Our job as ASUG, and I take it very seriously, is to try to get the noise out of the system, to help customers make the right choices with the right amount of information that the partners and SAP are aligned on. One of the things that I talked to yesterday when I am in meetings with partners and SAP simultaneously, I say to them, I need you to be consistent, I need you to be truthful, and we need to tell the customer the same thing every time we get together, because it is not helpful when customers are trying to make large-scale buying decisions about where they're going with their SAP investments. If they hear X from SAP, they hear Y from the partners, and ASUG is somewhere in the middle of that. That doesn't help us speed up buying decisions. That slows it down. So we have to be much more careful in what we're saying. We have to be much more pragmatic about how we're saying it, and we always have to think about it with the customer in mind. What is ASUG's role here? And by the way, as ASUG, as SAP's largest user community on the planet next to DSAG, the German one, I know every single executive board member at SAP by name. They know me by name. They know exactly who ASUG is. So when we speak and say, you need to think about this through the customer lens, they listen. They listen. And these are big organizations, and sometimes they try to listen through the customer lens. Sometimes it requires people like me to remind them. There's one thing that I bring to the table that no one else does. I've never worked for a partner, and I've never worked for SAP or software technology. I came up through the CIO. I came up through corporate IT. I understand how corporate IT thinks about how the buyers of SAP solutions think, and we need more of me to help coalesce this and get to simplicity. Otherwise, we as customers are just going to spin around in circles. That's what I believe ASUG's role is, and it is more important than ever.
Mm-hmm. So how often do you talk to SAP's leadership team, and what do you typically talk about?
I was in Waldorf 2 weeks ago and met with many of the top leaders. I will meet with them again in Orlando. I was with them yesterday. I am talking to them, if not daily, multiple times a week. And not just me. ASUG is an organization of 80 people. My entire team is talking to SAP all the time. We are trying to get to clarity I mean, these are constant conversations, but I'm also talking to all the leading hyperscalers. I'm also talking to the global SIs. I'm also talking to many of the key software providers and trying to bring all those different perspectives into focus and trying to get to a cohesive message every day, multiple times a day.
Having that good relationship with SAP also seems important in making sure you have the most current training resources and product information. You guys do a lot of that kind of thing. How do you work with SAP to make sure that you do have that timely information and the support materials such as
Yeah.
product documentation and access to the different SAP experts?
A great question. SAP has resources and headcount that are dedicated solely to us. So we have specific people that work alongside us every single day. I believe one of the things that is the most important about the ASUG relationship is it's trusted with SAP. As I said to you earlier, my job is to keep everyone in the room, not show them exit points. So I believe that what our purpose as ASUG is to create a very strong ecosystem that stands the test of time, which means we have to be able to provide consistent, reliable, trustworthy information, which means we're listening all the time. And we're trying to speak, and when we speak with clarity and consistency. That, Jim and David, is harder than ever, but also more necessary than ever.
What are the different happenings, services, and events, seminars, that kind of thing, in the ASUG parts of next week's conference that you're most excited about?
We, on Orlando Monday, Sapphire Now and ASUG Annual Conference, I just call it Orlando because it's just simpler to say. On Orlando Monday, we have a whole bunch of pre-conference sessions going off on various topics like BTP, enterprise architecture. We're bringing executives together Monday afternoon, so we do a whole program there. We are doing sessions on the show floor for the 2 days of Sapphire, and then when we go into the fall events, we do industry-based events. We're doing ASUG Tech Connect, which is the reimagination of SAP Tech Ed. SAP Tech Ed is virtual. Here in North America, we do ASUG Tech Connect as an in-person, face-to-face experience. We are thinking about how do we take our 39 chapters across North America and bring content to them. We are seeing huge amounts of interest in the local geographies coming together. And I think that's a critical component of what we do as a community, is not just bring you together and make you go to spend nights in hotel rooms and spend times on a show floor, but you can actually get out from your office or your home office and go down the road and spend it with your fellow SAP professionals in your local city. And I think that's incredibly important. Listen to what they're doing, listen to what's coming at you, being able to understand this day in, day out. And I think that's the power of ASUG. It's all of that coming together, plus the digital delivery mechanisms that we have, coupling all that together.
What do you think SAP is mostly going to try to talk about next week? What do you think will be the main themes?
Artificial intelligence, followed by RISE, followed by S4. But I think it's going to come back to, if you think about who's going to be on the keynote stage, AWS is going to be there talking about their AI stuff. NVIDIA is going to be there. So it's going to be a very heavy AI message, completely consistent with what everyone else is talking about. And by the way, I walk into some of these conversations with somewhat of a degree of skepticism. I always leave with a little bit of a better appreciation for what's actually going on.
I guess that's what SAP is probably going to talk about or wants to talk about. What about the pain points of the ASUG members and maybe the major questions that are on their mind? What should SAP either be emphasizing or somehow trying to address at Sapphire next week?
First and foremost, help me, and both of you pointed this out, as a customer, help me understand what your AI strategy is. And by the way, if you can even take that to the next level and help me understand how that integrates with maybe what the hyperscalers are saying or what some of my other key software partners are saying, that would be incredibly helpful, right? But I think that, the odds of probability go down as you jump into some of those. So let's start with you, SAP. Tell me about Joule, and tell me how Joule is going to help me drive business outcomes. I would love to see SAP use its AI capabilities to help drive faster conversions to S4 with better quality, better predictable results, less risk, and less cost, right? So how can we use some of these AI tools to drive testing, data management, and some of the other areas where we spend an incredible amount of time on these systems, moving them from point A to point B. The next thing I would say is one of the great things that we know is that we will move more customers to S4 and to RISE if the implementation costs can come down, right? So if we can figure out a way to make these less costly, there will be a lot more people moving because business cases are a big issue. Moving from your legacy ECC environment to this new frontier, which I think is going to be incredibly important, isn't easy. So how do we help customers get there? How can AI help them get there faster? I think that's what's going to be on the customer's mind. And by the way, there's a lot of interest in Sapphire this year. Registration is up, right? People are coming. How can we help organizations close skill gaps? How do we make sure that they understand how to make the right decisions? How do I select the right partners? When I'm in conversations with SAP about what I need in my RISE solution, how do I ask for the right things at the right time? I think those are critically important things. One of the other areas that I've started to get interested in the last couple of months is SAP's Activate methodology. And I'm seeing some very interesting kind of coming together where the global SIs and SAP are starting to converge and say the Activate methodology, we all accept it. I don't think everyone is there yet, but if we actually can all agree from a customer base and SAP and the partners that the way you move from an ECC environment to S4 using Activate is consistent, I think that's golden, because I think what happens is we can start to drive better quality because we're all starting to speak the same language. We understand the stage gates. We understand what good looks like. And I think SAP's helped this because some of the investments they've made in helping customers get to this next arena and to get to RISE and get to S4 are forcing this adoption of SAP Activate and forcing that certain things only get released from a credit perspective when you go through these stage gates and you can demonstrate it. I think that's super interesting. And if everyone's on the same methodology, I think it takes noise out of the environment. And one of the things that I rally against all the time is there's just too much noise. If we can get customers talking in the same language consistently, and we can be disciplined about the terms we're using, the definitions we're using, and we can start to raise the bar that you can't just bring in new terms willy-nilly, I think we get to a better outcome because it's much more predictable, the quality is higher, and we're all on the same page.
Along those lines, then, maybe you can just briefly, for somebody that Activate might be a new term to them, what exactly is that for customers?
Yeah, Activate is SAP's process by which you go and you identify what my ECC landscape looks like and the steps I'm going to go through to get to S4. And that can be business case, that can be through, how do I design my solution, how do I deploy it, how do I configure it, how do I work, and if the SIs and SAP and you as the customer are all moving through that format and that process consistently, and you're using the same words and the same language, that is very important. Otherwise, everyone's kind of doing it their own way and coming with their own way, and we can't get to repeatable outcomes. The thing you talked about earlier, right? One of the great things about SAP is also one of the biggest handicaps, and that is that everyone approaches this differently, and that's great, but the problem is that it's very difficult to get to repeatable process because everyone says, I'm different. And so, the only way you get to, to higher quality processes that execute more efficiently, you get to standardization. And if we can standardize the way customers move through this, I think that's a ton of value. And if we can do that in a really good way, then the next time we have to do upgrades and the next time we have to adopt, innovation, we can do that faster because we're all starting from a much more consistent baseline.
Well, Jeff, this has been interesting as always. Thanks for joining the podcast today.
Hopefully I answered every single one of your questions to your satisfaction.
You have, and thank you, Jim.
Yeah,
thanks.
Thanks,
David,
everybody.
Jim, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
We'll see you next week.